On a quiet suburban street in rural Kentucky, a tragedy unfolded that no one, not even closest neighbors, saw coming. A respected father, known for his discipline and traditional values, suddenly turned a gun on his own daughter-in-law. The crime shocked the community. But what made it worse wasn't just the violence. It was the secret that led to it. A secret affair, hidden in plain sight for over 3 years, between the daughter-in-law and his own wife. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about power, pride, and what happens when someone underestimated for too long finally takes matters into their own hands. For decades, Richard Carlson was the face of stability. A stern but generous man in his late 60s, Richard was the patriarch of the Carlson family. He'd built his reputation on hard work, discipline, and faith. In the community, he was respected. To his family, though, he was feared more than loved. Richard's wife, Martha, was quiet and obedient, or at least that's how Richard believed her to be. She played her role as a dutiful wife, rarely challenging him, never causing a scandal. To outsiders, the Carlsons looked picture perfect. Enter Emily, Richard's daughter-in-law. Married to his eldest son, James, Emily was younger, lively, and bold in ways Martha never dared to be. She was the kind of person who turned heads when she walked into a room, but Richard dismissed her as immature, irresponsible, and unworthy of a son. What Richard never realized was that behind his back, Emily and Martha had struck up a secret bond. What began as innocent conversations and stolen moment of comfort soon escalated into something forbidden, an affair that lasted 3 years. Emily and Martha's affair wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Martha, after years of being silenced and overlooked, felt truly seen for the first time. Emily admired Martha's quiet strength and gave her the attention she'd been starved of in her marriage. But the two women knew the risk. If Richard ever found out, it wouldn't just mean divorce or humiliation. It could mean violence. And yet, the thrill of secrecy only pulled them closer. Friends noticed how often Emily visited her in-laws, even when James wasn't around. Neighbors whispered about the late-night lights in the Carlson home, long after Richard had gone to bed. But no one spoke out. In small towns, silence often keeps the peace, until it doesn't. The turning point came in the most ordinary way. Richard, ever suspicious of Emily, began noticing things. Lipstick stains on Martha's coffee cup that weren't hers, hushed phone calls late at night, and glances between Emily and Martha that lasted too long. One night, unable to shake the feeling, Richard checked Martha's phone. What he found shattered his reality, messages, photos, and undeniable proof of the 3-year affair. To Richard, it wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. The woman he ruled over in silence had been living another life, right under his nose. And with Emily, the daughter-in-law he had always disdained. The man who had prided himself on control felt powerless for the first time. On a stormy October evening, Richard confronted them. Emily had come over, as she often did, under the pretense of helping Martha with dinner. But this time, Richard was waiting. His voice was calm at first, too calm. He laid the phone on the table, the incriminating messages glowing on the screen. Martha, Emily, how long? Martha froze. Emily, however, didn't. Instead of cowering, she lifted her chin and answered boldly, long enough for her to finally be happy. It was the first time anyone had spoken to Richard that way inside his own house, and it was the last straw. In a fit of rage, Richard stormed into his study and returned with his revolver. His hand shook, but his voice didn't. "You disgraced this family. Both of you," he growled. Martha pleaded, but Emily stepped forward, refusing to back down. "Do it," she dared him. "But know this, you'll never erase the truth. She was never yours to control." The words sliced through the air like a blade. In Richard's world, defiance was unforgivable. The gun went off. Emily collapsed, blood staining the carpet. Martha screamed, rushing to her lover's side. The neighbors would later say they heard the echo of that single shot reverberate through the quiet street. For a moment, Richard thought he'd restored order. He believed he'd silenced a rebellion, regained control. But what he didn't realize was that by pulling the trigger, he had destroyed everything he once valued. Emily survived. The bullet missed her heart by inches. And when the police arrived, it wasn't Emily or Martha who looked weak. It was Richard, a trembling old man, weapon in hand, facing the truth he could no longer bury. The irony was brutal. The patriarch who demanded loyalty and obedience was now exposed as a criminal, disgraced in the very community that once admired him. The courtroom was packed when Richard stood trial. Reporters called it the family scandal of the decade. Emily, bandaged but alive, testified with steady eyes. Martha, once silent and submissive, now spoke with a strength that stunned everyone. Richard sat stone-faced, but his legacy was gone. The underdog he had dismissed, Emily, had not only survived his wrath, but destroyed the image he worked a lifetime to build. The jury didn't deliberate long. Richard was sentenced, his name forever tainted. This story isn't just about forbidden love. It's about control, about how those who wield power through fear and silence often underestimate the strength of those they oppress. Emily was never supposed to win. Martha was never supposed to find her voice. But together, they shattered the illusion of Richard's control. Justice wasn't just a prison sentence. Justice was a truth finally being spoken out loud. But the story doesn't end here, because while Richard sat behind bars, whispers began to spread. Some claimed he wasn't done, that he had powerful friends on the outside, willing to settle scores. And Emily, though she survived the bullet, she would soon face a new battle, because secrets have a way of breeding enemies, and not everyone was ready to let her walk away free. The question remains, was the shot that night the end of Richard's reign, or only the beginning of something darker? When Richard Carlson was led away in handcuffs, the community thought the nightmare was over. The tyrant father, the man who tried to kill his daughter-in-law in a jealous rage, was finally behind bars. Justice had been served, or so it seemed. But prisons don't just cage men like Richard. They give them time. Time to plot, time to stew, time to call in favors from people who still owe them debts. And soon, Emily, the young woman who had survived his bullet, would discover that Richard's reach extended far beyond the walls of the cell. The shooting had split the Carlson family straight down the middle. Richard's son, James, the man married Emily, was humiliated. Some say he hated Emily more for the affair than he hated his father for the gunshot. He lost his wife and his family name in one blow, a neighbor recalled. James blamed Emily for everything. He never forgave her. Meanwhile, Martha, finally free of Richard's grip, stood proudly by Emily's side. Their relationship was no longer a secret, and though whispers followed them wherever they went, they refused to hide. But freedom comes with a price. Richard's supporters, old friends, business partners, and even members of his church saw Emily and Martha not as survivors, but as the cause of Richard's downfall. And those loyalists were watching closely. Behind bars, Richard was not just another inmate. He was a man with decades of influence, money hidden in places no court could seize, and allies who believed in his cause. He wasn't broken, one former cellmate later confessed. He was planning, always planning. Richard wrote letters, dozens of them, some to lawyers, some to old friends. But some, investigators later discovered, were coded instructions, subtle, careful words that carried hidden threats. Emily's name appeared again and again. She thinks she won, Richard told a fellow inmate, but I'll show her what it means to take something from me. Months after the trial, Emily and Martha tried to rebuild their lives. They rented a small house on the edge of town, far from the Carlson estate. They thought distance would give them peace. But peace never came. First, it was little things. A car idling outside their home late at night. Anonymous calls with nothing but silence on the other end. A dead crow left on their porch. Emily dismissed it at first, until one night, she swore she saw James's truck parked at the corner of their street, watching. Had James turned against her? Or was he just another pawn in Richard's long game? One evening, while Martha was at the store, Emily came home to find the front door slightly open. Inside, the living room had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, photo frames smashed. But nothing valuable was missing. Instead, on the kitchen table sat a single object, Richard's old family Bible. Inside, a note, "This isn't over." You can't erase me. R. Emily's hands shook as she held the note. Richard was locked away. Yet somehow, his presence was still inside her home. For years, Emily had been underestimated, first by Richard, then by James, even by the community that called her reckless. But the shooting had changed her. She wasn't just a daughter-in-law anymore. She was a survivor. And this time, she wasn't going to wait for Richard to make the next move. Emily reported the break-in, but the police had little to go on. No fingerprints, no witnesses. To them, it looked like a prank or paranoia. But Emily knew better. If Richard could send someone into her home once, he could do it again. So she began her own investigation. Emily dug into Richard's network, the businesses he once ran, the friends who still visited him in prison. What she found was worse than she imagined. Richard had been moving money through a shell company, paying people on the outside. One of those names made her blood run cold. James, her husband, the man she once trusted, had been funneling money from his father's accounts, keeping the Carlson empire alive even while Richard rotted behind bars. And if James was still loyal to his father, Emily realized then the stalking, the threats, the break-in, they weren't random. They were warnings. Late one night, Emily sat in her car outside the prison gates, staring at the fortress of concrete and steel where Richard was serving his sentence. She had two choices: walk away and keep living in fear, or go inside and face him directly. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. He knows where you'll be tomorrow. You can't run. Emily froze. Whoever had sent that text wasn't just threatening her. They knew her schedule, her movements, her life. And in that moment, Emily understood. Richard might be behind bars, but his war against her had only just begun. The real question was no longer whether she could survive him. It was whether she could stop him before he destroyed her for good. Emily thought surviving Richard's bullet was the worst thing she would ever face. She was wrong, because while Richard sat behind bars, his influence poisoned everything around her, her marriage, her community, even her own sense of safety. But what Richard didn't realize was that the underdog he had once dismissed was no longer afraid. And when Emily finally struck back, she wouldn't just expose Richard, she would end his reign once and for all. The threatening text message changed everything. Emily knew someone close to her was feeding Richard information. The only question was who. Her first suspicion was James, her estranged husband. He had always resented her for the affair, and now she had proof he was funneling money to his father from the outside. But Emily also realized the problem was bigger than James. Richard wasn't just relying on family. He had a network of old allies, men who still saw him as a pillar of the community, a man wronged by scandal. These loyalists were the ones sending messages, breaking into her house, and leaving warnings. If Emily wanted peace, she couldn't just hide. She had to dismantle Richard's power, piece by piece. Emily began keeping records. She tracked James's bank transactions, photographed suspicious vehicles, and quietly met with an investigative journalist from Louisville who had been following the case. The journalist, intrigued by Emily's courage, agreed to help. Together, they began piecing together the story Richard had hoped would stay buried. Money laundering, coded letters, secret meetings between James and his father's friends. It wasn't just intimidation. It was organized crime, hidden under the Carlson family name. Months later, armed with evidence, Emily did the unthinkable. She requested a prison visit with Richard. The guards led her into a cold, sterile room. Richard sat on the other side of the glass, older, thinner, but his eyes still burned with arrogance. Well, he smirked. The prodigal whore returns. Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she slid a folder across the counter. Inside were copies of the evidence she'd gathered, financial records, coded letters, names of his accomplices. "I know everything," she said. "And soon, so will the world." For the first time, Richard's smile faltered. "You think you can beat me?" he hissed. "Even if I die in here, there will always be someone ready to carry out my will." Emily leaned forward, her voice steady. "No, when I'm done, there won't be anything left of your will to carry." The journalist released the expose weeks later. Headlines screamed across Kentucky and beyond. Carlson family linked to criminal network. Convicted patriarch's son implicated in illegal dealings. James was arrested. Several of Richard's so-called loyalists were investigated. Their businesses shut down, their reputation shattered. The community that once admired Richard now recoiled in shame. The Carlson name, once a badge of power, had become a curse. And Richard, locked in a cell, he could only watch as the empire he built crumbled at the hands of the very woman he tried to destroy. One night, Emily received a call from prison. Richard Carlson was dead. A heart attack, the warden said. He never made it out of his cell. Some might call it poetic justice. Others whispered that it was too convenient, that maybe one of the men he once commanded had finally turned against him. Emily didn't care. For the first time in years, she slept without fear. In the end, Richard Carlson lost not because of a gun or a courtroom or even a prison sentence. He lost because he underestimated the woman he tried to erase. Emily had been the underdog, the outsider, the one everyone dismissed. But in the face of betrayal and violence, she found a strength no one, including herself, knew she had. Her story is a reminder that power built on fear will always collapse, and that sometimes the best revenge isn't survival, it's exposing the truth. Richard thought he was silencing Emily when he pulled the trigger, but in the end, that shot only gave her a louder voice. And long after Richard's name is forgotten, Emily's will be remembered as the woman who stood up, fought back, and won.